Welcome to the reading series, everyone. We're so happy to have Ashley May Hoiland with us today. The English reading series is sponsored by the Department of English and the College of Humanities with help from Rebecca Casanave and Robert Means and our friends at the library. Please do look for information about Ashley's platform, Mind to Tell, and links to her work, and those will be in the chat window following Chanel's introduction. Our prayer today will be offered by Amy Carrasco. And then following that, Chanel Earl will introduce our reader. And then please don't forget to join us next week for a reading by our very own Pat Madden. Amy.
Heavenly Father, that we hear from this wonderful author, Ashley, that we can be able to gain insight and some understanding and from her experience, and we might be able to become better writers and challenge our current thoughts. We love thee and we're grateful for our Savior, Jesus Christ. We offer this prayer in Jesus Christ.
Hello, fellow attendees of this reading.
Oh, you're muted.
Oh, there we go. Sorry, I disappeared there for a second. I don't know if you could see me. But I'm very excited today to introduce Ashley May Hoiland to all of you. I'm a little bit starstruck. I first read her book, 100 Birds Taught Me to Fly, a few years ago. And to introduce her, I'd just like to praise that book and some of her writing that I've read. I'm really impressed with the way that Ashley demonstrates an authentic faith through her writing, which is something that I think is sometimes difficult to create. She shows a genuine love and empathy for others and a contagious optimism that when I read her book, I was able to pull from and feel inspired by. And I really love her gift for seeing and sharing the beauty in the world. So I'd like to introduce her as a wonderful teacher, a writer, a poet, a memoirist, and a Latter-day Saint. And I'm really excited to hear her read today. Thank you.
Okay, I think it's me now. Thank you so much for being here. This is for sure an interruption in my regularly scheduled programming, which is usually wrangling kids who are trying to do homeschool and nobody listening to me. So it feels really nice to be in a space where hopefully I will be listened to because my children do not care very much to listen to me. And to that end, I will say, I know Zoom can be a funny place to do some of these things and to kind of feel that community sense of doing something together. But I found, I've done lots of things, lots of teaching, lots of community things over the past 7 months on Zoom. And I think there is something really beautiful that can still happen within that space. And so I would say as much as possible to not multitask as you can. I think that that's such a valuable part of doing something together is being present with one another. And so I know even though we are all in our own particular spaces, yeah, I'm really grateful to be here together with you. And I hope that we can all be as present as possible. To start off this reading, I'll do just a little bit of reading from some old work for my past two books. So I have this one and this one. So I'll read some from those, and then I'll read some current work that is still kind of in process and is stuff that I've been working on kind of since we've all been in quarantine. So with that, I will get going, and I'll leave time for questions at the end. So if you have them along the way, go ahead and throw them in the Q&A box, and then I will read through them as we get going. But I won't read them as I'm doing that. I'll just get to them at the end. So from this book, I'm just going to read a couple of pieces that are, well, I'm going to read the 2 letters that I wrote to my children, who I said, do not listen to me. Sometimes they do. And so these are 2 letters that I wrote for them that are from this book. This first one is called Letter for My Daughter Thea. For my birthday, we went to the beach, not a sandy beach, but a secret rocky beach down a path rife with poison oak that we jumped over. The day was a little bit foggy, a little bit colorless, a little bit cold. I walked along behind Carl, Remy, and you, stopping to pick up a fossil of a shell, a piece of abalone, a memory of my son looking out into the vast ocean. We had been collecting quietly, sliding over wet rocks, filling our pockets with treasure for almost an hour, when you, all of your 3 years, came and sat next to me. I noticed your little palm was tightly shut, and when I asked what you had, you opened your hand to reveal a dozen carefully selected round pebbles. You have a propensity for treasuring small spherical objects, and I welled up with intense pride and love as I pictured you, my devout little girl, searching, examining, holding on to the very best things without even the intention to show me unless I asked. Thea, as a girl, it was hard for me to speak out of fear for saying the wrong thing, or fear for being too bold or even too soft. As a grown woman, it is sometimes even more difficult. But please let your wandering spiritual impressions take shape and give them a voice, even if they happen between the odd hours of making casseroles and bathing children, or on the days of feeling alone and without direction, in a workspace or through sleepless nights. Speak even when you are sure there is someone smarter and more informed than you in the room. Give credence to your spiritual ideas. Allow a bit of chaos to reign within your thoughts, and then let that unexpected happiness spill into the spaces around you. Your story carries power, your experience is valid, your voice is vital. I think back on that moment on the beach, and I want so much for your first impulse, not to be simply to siphon away the palm full of precious and strong pebbles that miraculously tumbled to you from a vast and completely wild earth. I want your first impulse to be to open your hand and talk about how you found them, to let them shine out like rising firelight on a dark hillside. And then the second one is a letter to my son, Remy, who at the time was 4, I believe. Okay, letter to my son, Remy. One afternoon, you and I waited together at the bus stop on the small island in Sweden where we lived. Then we sat quietly in our seats, not disembarking until we found a trail into the woods. We walked for hours, and I watched you, my little boy, your tiny spirit shining under a canopy of trees along the muddy trail. That day, the dung beetle seemed an odd character to save, but I suppose you were charmed by the shimmer of blue on his back, his feet to air, and kicking madly without traction, heaving against this deadly world until you came with your stick and delicately overturned each wriggling body one at a time, saving them from a fate they could not even consider as they trotted back to the horse's pile. At one point, we entered a meadow beneath a roof of leaves, the shape of which we had never seen, with an anthill taller than you and scurrying with surprising life. The afternoon light angling off in points, the whole forest a cathedral for our own communion. This earth is not a mundane school. It is a journey with mentors who teach us about love in moments of refracted light in a meadow. It began to rain, and we hiked down to the lake. Pings of water spread as far as we could see, stirring the water while delivering the promise 1,000 times over. These waters will be calm again. My son, you are both a mentor and mentored in miracles and hope. The dung beetle, the light on the leaves before the storm, the way you held your hand up to the sky and let the rain pour over you. Okay, so that is from this book that came out through the Maxwell Institute in 2016, so 4 years ago. And then the next book I'm going to read from is A New Constellation. And just to give a little bit of background on this book and why it came to be, this book is a practice in and kind of an experiment in writing in real time, both writing and publishing in real time. So this book I wrote very, very quickly in about 3 weeks. It's a short book, so it was possible to do. And it was also made possible by the fact that I had very unexpectedly been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in a situation where, like, it happened in one day. I went to an eye appointment because I thought there was something wrong with my eye. I went to the emergency room and was diagnosed that day. So it was like completely unexpected and surprising. And as part of the process of MS, they give you lots of steroids to kind of help you fix the symptoms that you're having. And so they did not fully tell me this, and I should have known, but I didn't for some reason, that steroids make it so that you cannot sleep. So I was up for a lot of days just through the night. And I recognized in that moment that I was experiencing something that was very distinct and that would not feel the same in 3 months or 6 months or in a year. So I was really curious about what it is to write into a moment as it's happening. And then I was really lucky to find a publisher that was willing to kind of publish it a couple months after I wrote it. And then I was able to do readings as this was also happening, as this news felt really new to me, and as I was kind of still experiencing the emotions of that. And so I guess I share that story to say, I think that books and writing can come from scenarios that are very unexpected. And when you feel that impulse of something that's potent and vibrant and real and something that you have ownership of, I think it is worth taking advantage of that moment and writing into that moment, because it was true that 6 months or even 3 months after this experience, it was not the same. And when I look back and read this, I think, oh, I don't even remember that detail. Like, that is not part of my repertoire and vernacular now. And so I think, and I think that there is value in saying, I'm not aiming to create a single magnum opus of writing. I am creating like multiple, I kind of think of them in terms of like art shows or projects where I'm continually making projects, and none of them are like the thing that I'm going to create for my entire life. They're a thing that I'm creating in that moment. So I will read a few pieces from this. And this one is, I guess I'll read, I'll read a poem, a very short prose piece, and then a longer essay. And it will be the only longer essay that I'll probably read in this. And I've talked some in the Q&As and speaking to classes about kind of cross-pollinating between genres. And I think that these pieces speak to form equaling function, that it's okay to play with genre and to jump across ponds between them when the content calls for something else. So I will get to those. I'm just going to take a quick drink. Also out of my thing that says mom's water don't touch, which no one listens to. Okay. This is the opening poem of the book. The world changes without warning. When my daughter finally crossed the monkey bars on her own, I thought the world would surely want to know the way she created her own momentum, the way her small hands gripped the blue metal bar, and when she was about to fall, the way she adjusted her weight hanging in the air like that, her whole body intent on finishing. The way, for a moment, I saw her hang with one hand, and her strength surprised us both, but neither said a word. The way she set her feet back on the earth at the end and looked at me, and both of us knew she was not the same as she was 1 minute before. And then this is just the opening piece of the book, which will hopefully give you kind of a sense of the space that I was writing from. And I did, partly I don't know what possessed me to like sit down and write immediately after this diagnosis. Maybe that is like just what writers do. But this was actually written the night that I came home from the hospital. This is everything and nothing, and everything and nothing. In a year or in 10 years, I may look back and see that my life did not change at all. Or it may be that everything shifts and my body, my life, will look drastically different than the way it looks now. The heart does not know what it can hold until it is given the thing it must carry. I did not know I would love my children or the ocean or the purple flowers that bloom in our front yard tree until they showed up for me, until I was asked to stoop down and take a piece of them into my heart. I imagine it is the same with things that are hard. I cannot dictate beforehand the ways they will contract and expand my universe until they show up at my front door unexpected. And then I will know they have traveled a long way to get here, that they have made plans to be here for this part of the journey, and that I must let them in. So if this is everything, okay. If it is nothing, okay. The closer I get to looking at the differences, the two ideas seem to be the exact same thing. And a thing to note about this book as well, I wrote this at a time when I had truly no idea what this diagnosis meant for me. And so when I say, like, if this is everything, okay, and if this is nothing, okay, and I think that that's part of, for me at least, part of writing is recognizing the validity in those experiences, even when the outcome is unknown. And so I've been really lucky that I've been super healthy since that diagnosis. And there's part of me that wants to go back and like discredit this book then, and discredit kind of the fear and overwhelm that I felt at the time of the diagnosis. And so I've had to be very intentional in saying, no, like this was not a book written from a place of like fear or anxiety. This was written because I was very curious about what it looks like to write into this experience. And so, and I've had to remind myself that regardless of what has happened since, this experience was very real and personal and worth writing into. Okay, so this is the longer essay, so buckle up, I guess. And this is a few days after I was diagnosed. It was right around Christmas time. We drove back to Utah for Christmas, toward that house in the suburbs I suddenly longed for. On the morning I finished my last steroid treatment, I had an absurd amount of adrenaline and energy from the medication, so I drove us straight through the Sierra Mountains and on into the desert as the night began to fall. The kids slept in little piles in the back seat, the black, cold sky, without clouds tucked in around us. Again, our story, just ours, moving at 80 miles per hour through the quiet basins of northern Nevada. Had it been light enough, Carl, who's my husband, who is a geologist, would have pointed out to me the road that winds up into the Ruby Mountains. He always tells me how it doesn't look like much from the freeway, but once you are up there, you can see secret lakes, green forests, 360-degree views from the top, where you can see both basin and then range and then basin and so on to the Sierras or to the Wasatch. And then you can see both ancient and modern fault lines, and beneath your feet, the nearly unrecognizably deformed and metamorphosed rock layers that turn in on themselves like folds of the brain. Carl's pace would pick up as he retold it, the wholesale rifting of the North American crust, the once continuous stratigraphy full of fossils and untold stories, now broken apart by the slowest of divergent motions, appearing to culminate at this very location where its deepest parts are now exposed. He always says that being a geologist is like reading the language of the earth. The mountain belts are the chapters, the evidence of tectonic shifts and ancient processes, the paragraphs. The rocks themselves are the sentences. The minerals, like the tiny zircon he spent years studying in his lab, are the words, and the atoms that make up everything are the letters. I pause. My neurons then are the words, and my mountains will erode like all others. Just weeks before this drive through the desert, the day I noticed that my eye had double vision, Carl had defended his dissertation to a room full of scientists and friends in the geology library in a corner of campus. Watching him from the audience, I again sensed that he had access to so many stories I did not know. He loves the millions of years it takes to form something new. He loves the garnets he spent summers searching for to bring back and analyze. The garnets, in particular, are like little time capsules, retaining information about what pressures and temperatures the rocks in which they were found were formed at. To anyone else, these garnets would seem just like another mineral. To Carl, they are ancient, miniature Bibles that he spent 7 years peering into, learning the language, trying to decipher what it all means. I admire his dedication to telling the story of the mountains 4 hours west of my hometown, and so far beyond any landscape I ever considered, a landscape most people will never think of or care about at all. As he gave his hour-long talk in front of that audience, I recognize that what he does sits on the point of a pin, but at the same time, the questions he is asking of a single set of rocks in the Nevada desert has significance far beyond its location. What he says will either build upon or tear down a piece of what scientists have thought they have known for decades. Carl is pushing against the Earth's story and then putting his ear to the ground to see what is told back. Some of the answers that came after his years of digging for them were surprising to every scientist in that room. Sometimes even he is hesitant to believe his own data, which suggests the garnets, which were thought to have been created by the high pressures experienced when buried tens of miles below the Earth's surface, were in fact never buried far down at all. Instead, it seems they had always stayed relatively close to the surface and had been squeezed with incredible pressure from the sides until they resembled something that was previously thought to have only been possible below the weight of a mountain range resembling the Himalayas. I guess the point, then, is that the thing that I think I know is not likely the thing that I actually do. The point is that I cannot know the story I am about to live. I can only prepare myself to witness it, examine it, and be willing to be surprised by it. And however local and insignificant my ground may seem, it is relevant because all stories are relevant. Carl tended to a forgotten piece of land until it told him something that he did not know before. He patiently ran the failed experiments and went back each summer to hike through the heat alone to gather more samples. He lived in his advisor's office for 3 weeks that last summer while the kids and I were in Utah, and our housing had expired. He ran one final, desperate experiment to clarify what he had spent 7 years trying to understand, and it worked. The complicated machines that filled 2 entire rooms and involved lasers, small vacuum chambers, and powerful magnets ultimately had the ability to say just how many millions of years before and under how much pressure a garnet had been formed. The answers came, but not in the way he had planned, and not in the way he had wanted so many years earlier. I know he gets embarrassed at times about the insignificance of the work that he does as a theoretical geologist, and sometimes I am not patient about his work either. That morning, sitting on the padded chair out in the audience while he presented the work of his dissertation, I did not know that I was also on the precipice of change, even if the whole story had already been written in my DNA. I did not know that the pressures that would form my story into something as surprising as a garnet in the desert would not come from the places I assumed they would. I did not know that everything would be more complicated, more complex, and more difficult to understand than a chronological story about what it is to be human in this world. I've come to understand that Carl's geological work sometimes feels unimportant to me because I can't understand how a single spot out in the mountains of a desert matters so much. Why spend the time there? But I've often heard him use the phrase type locality, which refers to the first place where a particular phenomenon is discovered, often reach outward to shed light on similar processes and areas in different parts of the world. I am not the type locality for sickness or hardship, or even for someone who has faced something unexpected. But I am my own type locality. I am unearthing newness for myself in this space, The nexus of webbing this creates is complex. We are excavating newness, a different way of reading both our history and our future, and shaping our story over and over into what we didn't know it could be. Okay, so thank you for holding on to that longer essay. And then I'm going to move into a few newer pieces that I've been working on, and a lot of them are specifically pieces since we've all been in quarantine, because it is a very curious space, and a lot of just a lot of things are being unearthed during this time. So I'll just read, they're shorter pieces, and I'll just read through them until we are out of time. Yeah, I'll just start and kind of move through them. And again, these I would say are a mix between poems and small prose pieces. And that's all I'll say about that. We can ask more in the Q&A, or talk more in the Q&A about genre if we want. And some of these, because they're new, are not titled yet. And I know that's not a thing we should do, is have untitled poems. They will have titles, they just don't yet. Okay. And what of the swans who talked, no shouted, no rejoiced under the full moon all night, their wings like thick paper, no, the fabric of my grandma's dress, no, feathers stacked together like people on a bus at rush hour, no, like my children sleeping next to each other in the same bed, no, the feathers of their wings like gurneys curved to hold a body just so. Anyway, every time I woke that night, I heard them down the river, like they could not stop being together. And today, standing at the edge of another body of water at dawn, the first day we were all supposed to stay far away from each other, no, quarantined from each other, no, missed each other terribly. My son caught a rainbow trout near the shore with his hands and brought it onto the matted spring grass. I watched as the fish moved. No, his hands moved with it. No, the earth moved with both of them. The man next to us, no, 6 feet away from us, sitting in a fold-up chair with a bucket of bread he used as bait, clapped his hands together. No, celebrated for my son. No, was somehow there that morning with his own sorrows and joys. The shimmering pink stripe along the side of the trout reminded me of a rainbow. No, the tongue of a newborn. No, a crack in the light in the sky. Wait, a memory. Yes, a memory. The sunset from the bus in El Salvador. We were packed in so tight, so many people together. How it felt to be one of those nameless people, together on a bus, going somewhere. Yes, a miracle. My son tossed the fish back out into the glassy lake. The last flick of color flitted back home. And somewhere north, the swans are waking again, their necks untucking from back feathers, still weary from a night of rejoicing. Okay, this one is called A Prayer to the Unexpected. I watch my children, and I think they must be making a pact with the land. My son brings a beetle, black and white stripes, orange little horns. It is clinging to a stick he has found, and he says it is humming. I do not hear it, and I wonder what it is that stops me. I take a Polaroid of the three of them, a brother and two sisters, at the base of a small formation of sandstone sculptures. There is no one out here. The small fires at each oil well site indicate that someone, at some point, must come here. And the sky, the one we all have access to, is pink and blue and pulled taut above the flat mountains. I hear my daughter tell her brother to look up. She has promised somewhere, sometime, to try and see it all. And lastly, as we drive away from this canyon in the desert, we are listening to The Cure, and suddenly, as if they were the next beat of my heart, 3 wild horses, one white, one calico, and one black. I have not ever seen a wild horse, did not think I ever deserved to. Their pure wildness, the thickness of their wildness, the way their bodies moved like powerful flames in the dusk, like every sunset, like what I imagined myself to someday return as I cannot properly say what it is to come across 3 wild horses in the desert, but I will say this. The sky and all its colors could not hold them in. The flames standing guard at the oil wells flickered like stars. The horses did not care for time. They ran on into a world beyond the one that I know. The moment went on forever in many directions. Okay. And this one is often in my writing and in my writing process, it's useful for me just to list things and to play with images and language. And in a way, because I've been working a lot for a long time, I guess, with the idea of prayer and what it means to pray, and how you do that with language. And so many of these lists end up being sort of prayers for me. And this is one that is one of those lists. And I think it's interesting for me to butt them up against other pieces of writing, say longer pieces of writing, and see what those pieces of writing do to each other. So this one is called My Kids Learn to Pray. Pelvis of a rodent that fits in the palm of their hand, spine of a bird, dried carcass of a juniper fish, feather of an eagle, heart-shaped rock, perfect skipping stone, papery nests of wasps, more than I can count, sitting patiently and empty on the shelf, sticks, stones that are nothing, they might be concrete, a slab of slate, rounded obsidian, heavy as a small planet, crickets, worms, pink and full of earth, bright purple flowers that grow beside the dandelions before the last frost, spines of cactus, a live mouse, a dead mouse, a garter snake from the pond, twin snakes caught by the garden, the one with blue eyes they said was blind, the way they cradled it in the crook of their arm, set it on the heating pad before bed, dried stalks of sunflowers, geodes, rabbit's foot, matted fur, red sand, Ziplocs full of dirt, plastic cup of topaz pulled from the sandy bank, small silvery fish plucked from the from the break in the frozen lake, frogs, tadpoles that would never become frogs, spiders, femurs, tiny skulls, pebbles in a stream, red leaves streaked with yellow, morning glory, small, useless feathers. And I'll just read a couple more. Trying to decide which ones. I'll read this one. And I should say my more recent project is kind of working with spirituality and animals. I started writing pieces about encounters that I had with animals. And most of them actually are very commonplace, like unexciting encounters, and kind of working through what those are and what they are in context of spirituality. And then some of them are animals that I have heard about that kind of just took root in my head and I couldn't stop thinking about. And this is one of those. Okay. They say we started a story in order to finish it, but what if there is no end? There is a shark in the Arctic Ocean that is older than your grandmother's, at least 10 greats back. The shark, thought by scientists to be at least 392 years old, was swimming nearly 2 miles beneath the ocean's surface when my great-grandmothers were on the misty plains of Ireland. When I reach back, I cannot see the beginning either of my grandmother's or the shark. I only know that when I stood at the edge of the California Ocean that drinks both sunlight and shadows one night with my children, the waves uproariously big, my palms pressed tightly to their small chests, holding them to me, I thought of that shark and my grandmother's, the way we used to beg my grandma to let us stroke her soft hands while we held them in our laps, the way I knew they were somewhere out there in a universe that seems so big, the only explanation seems to call it a void. Somewhere out in that ocean, near the North Pole, around the perimeter of Greenland, the shark has held centuries. It is pushing itself through the frigid water at a mere foot per second, its heartbeat impervious to the click of what we know as time. Its wide body is covered by small, teeth-like barbs that slow the drag of currents and keep the shark steady in such deep waters. I imagine it is elegant in its movements. Perhaps it carries a scar from the bite of a mating shark. This shark, like all creatures that belong to the earth, was brought into existence with the end in mind. But what if the shark simply decided not to comply, not to take what was given? There is a deep loneliness when I think of being on this planet without my ancestors, and maybe that is why I hold to this shark as some connection between us, a loneliness that I once thought I knew exactly how to fill. It is not a loneliness made with sadness, but one that makes me curious about what else I do not know. 400 years ago, who did this shark's mother protect it from, and for how long? And when she died, what noise did the shark cry out with? At such a depth, nearly 9,000 feet, who would even hear it? In any case, there is a shark near Greenland, which mostly seems like another planet to say now, who has caretaken the ocean depths for longer than any of us have been alive, and will likely still be there long after we are gone. A keeper of secrets, a holder of sorrows, a reminder that we do not start a story simply in order to finish it. An ending is a byproduct of having lived, but how it comes is not guaranteed. And we cannot know that an ending is what we think it means. The night the waves heaved themselves into peaks and threatened to skiff right over the edge where I stood with my family, of course we saw our ending. Of course we picture ourselves being overcome and pulled right into the ocean with the waves. But my grandmothers, the greats, would they have pressed the waves back? Someday I will be an ancestor. The rain soaked our clothes and we took a few steps back, holding even tighter to each other. When we got into the car that night, the rain pounding the windshield, it was another beginning, one in which we walked to the edge of immensity and retreated back from it. The shark remains in this place we've labeled end, and it has survived there for longer than we were taught was possible. Okay, and then I'll just finish with this last short little piece. My daughter, like a fox, saw them first, and we did not believe her. She said, "There are animals way up on the mountain, and they are moving. A herd of elk so far up on the steep hillside, it looks as if I could have scooped them all into the pocket of my snow jacket." We stood, hands to our brows, and strained to watch the herd, dipping their heads to the frozen mountains, lifting their legs like puppets. God, is that you up there, on this unlikely mountain in the midst of winter? Is that you, hoping not to be noticed or bothered while the sun rays cast their last kindnesses across your shaggy body? I need you to know, my daughter found you before she knew what she was even looking for. She was delighted by your presence up there where we cannot even hear the stomping of hooves, the ambling along of survival. I need you to know that she will find you everywhere, even long after I've forgotten how to search. Okay, and with that, let's move into some Q&As. So go ahead, if you do have questions, I'll just move through them in the order that they come. And I'm guessing everybody knows how to put them in the Q&A box. Just go ahead and type them. And then I will read them aloud and answer them to the best of my ability. And I wish, actually, this is a part where I really wish that we were all together, because I love discussion, but I guess I will just picture us having a discussion while I talk. So you capture a lot of personal experiences in your writing. What is that process like? Do you think in the midst of the experience how you'd like to write about it in that moment? Do you keep a journal and then go back and select things you'd like to expand upon? Excellent question. So short answer, no, I actually don't keep a journal. I probably should. I do try and keep like a small notebook that I record things in. But I think the thing that I've learned over the years about being a writer is to really train myself to see things without judgment, to notice things. So I sometimes think I know what a detail or a moment or a memory means. And at this point, I shouldn't be surprised that I am never correct in what I think it means. and by that I mean, like, there are so many moments and details that I write into, and as I write into it, I feel like I understand it's so much more expansive than what I had anticipated. And so, and I think that kind of training myself, and I don't always do this the way I would like, but training myself to not dictate what an experience or detail or moment has to mean, allows the writing to be kind of this portal and an opening into something else. And it turns out that giving yourself permission to surprise yourself through that is one of the most rewarding and exciting things that you can do as a human, I think. And luckily, as writers, we have the opportunity to do that. So I would say, train yourself to take note of things. If do write things down, especially images and moments that feel potent, and then allow them to expand as needed into something totally different, and allow them to, in your writing process, make connections even when you are totally unsure of where they were going. Okay, we'll move on to the next question. You get so personal and authentic in so much of your writing, using my children's names, detailing places where you've lived. What motivates you to write so personally, and have you always written about your intimate personal life? That is a great question. And I actually saw once Anne Lamott speak, and somebody asked her a very similar question, and she answered, and I would somewhat echo this, that she said, what you see in my writing is, all of it is a decision, and it's not my entire life. Like, you may think that you know all of it through this writing, and you do not. And I think that that is a function of using language as a medium, is that, in a way, for me personally, functioning in that very small sphere and world that I know personally allows me to expand into more universal ideas, because I can't go big and move small. It just ends up being really trite and very bad writing. And so for me, functioning from what I can see and touch and take ownership of is really useful in doing that. And I think it gives people permission who are reading your writing to say, oh, like, if her life that is like as small and insignificant as any of the rest of ours can have some sort of meaning and thought to it, then maybe mine can as well. So that's part of my intention in doing that. And also just to recognize that even when you are being personal, you're not giving away more than you would like to give away. As a writer, you are always in charge of that. And you are not beholden to anyone to give away more than you would like to. It seems like you've lived in many different countries. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Where I've been and what influences had on your writing? Oh, and hi, served in Uruguay. Yeah, so at the time that I wrote 100 Birds Taught Me to Fly, my husband was doing some research in Sweden. So we lived there for 6 months. Maybe I sound way more exotic and exciting than my life actually is. I did live in El Salvador and Guatemala for a while. And then I served my mission in Uruguay. So I haven't, I've lived in places, and it has definitely, just experiencing anything new, whether that's a new country. I took a job at a bakery for a while, in part because I wanted to experience something far out of my comfort zone. So I think anything you can do to push yourself beyond what is normal in your particular life, just like kind of resets your eyes, and allows you to see things in a new way, which is always a great movement for writing. Let's see. Writing nonfiction requires recognizing and framing poignant moments. You are evidently very Good. Oh, thank you. How do you have experiences that translate to your writing, and how do you cultivate receptivity to those moments? Okay, so I think this is kind of similar to that other question. Yeah, and I'll just reiterate that idea of like giving yourself permission to take full ownership over what it is that you participate in your daily life, because I think often as writers we think that we have to jump to the most epic thing, and for me, like, it is tricky. I've wanted to somehow like, there are a lot of big things going on in our world, and I've even thought like, oh, I should write something about race and racism on a larger scale, and I have to remind myself that there are people who are doing that from a better vantage point than I am, and I don't need to somehow usurp their experience and write that, but I can very much write about my own experience with that, and that is much more powerful than me kind of positioning myself as being something other than what I am. So I think just giving yourself permission to say who I am and what I am is valuable and valid, and writing from that space. Hang on, let me check the time. Okay, so what we will do, I'm going to answer a couple more questions on here, and then I know a lot of you probably have to go because nobody needs the room that we're in because we're in our own rooms. I will stay on and answer a few more questions, but if you need to leave, go ahead and go after at 12:50. And thank you so much for being here. This is the funnest thing in the world to me. So I'm really grateful to be here. So let's see, how important would you say an understanding of language and structure is to expressing clearly the emotions you're trying to convey? Did your power of emotional expression come naturally, or did it require time and deliberate practice? Great question. So I am a huge fan of language, and the ability that language has to in some way get us a little bit closer to each other and to understanding the experience of someone else, while fully recognizing that it will never fully do that. So thinking of language as a medium, and I do actually, I mean, I think reading is a huge part of that, and understanding and having a clear sense of how other people are using language, I think is pretty important. And I think investing yourself in language, I don't know if Kim Johnson is here, but if you can, take a class from Kim and watch and learn from the way that she reveres language and is really dedicated to it. I think that that's one of my, like, one of the opening up points for me, is really revering and giving respect to the medium that you're using by investing in it. So yes, it's something that has, like, in some ways come naturally, but it's also a lot of practice and time, and experimenting with language, and really pushing on the boundaries of what you think it is able to do. So I think reading a lot, looking up words when you don't know them, and then just spending a lot of time and both using the language and listening to it, and also being critical of it. Because learning to articulate yourself through language honestly has changed my life and my world, and I think it is always worth the investment. Which I guess leads into the next question, what would you say more about the Mind to Tell project and what inspired it? Yeah, so I teach online writing classes with a friend that I actually met in the MFA program here at BYU. So foster those relationships because they will live on and be really wonderful things later in your life, or now in your life. So the Mind to Tell project was born of kind of this desire of wanting to help people better articulate their own particular stories, and recognizing that there is validity and power in learning to articulate those experiences. So yeah, in those classes we teach people, often people, and mostly women who have actually never written before, or many of them have never written before. And it's kind of the first time that they are encountering this idea of writing for themselves rather than, I think often as women, we are taught to be the recorders and the watchers of experience, and then use language to do that in kind of in service to other people, which can be a fine thing. But it's really, really exciting to me to see women be able to articulate their experience and their story for no one but themselves. So that's where that's born of. And then we are pivoting this next year to help women in particular write their first book within a year. So that's where that's going. And I guess what I would say from that, if you are a student or a writer and you're curious about the potential to make a living with and do the thing that you love, I would say like push on that, because there are ways. This is not what I anticipated I would be doing, but there are for sure ways to make that happen. And I guess it is time now. So if you need to go ahead and go. I see that there are still a lot of people here. So I guess I'll just keep answering questions. Spencer, is that all right?
Yeah, let me just thank everyone for coming if they do have to leave now. Ashley, I wish you could see the faces of the 120 people in attendance right now. That was a fantastic reading. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining the reading series this week. Don't forget to visit the links in the chat window. And please remember, same time next week for a reading by Pat Madden. So like Ashley said, stay on if you have questions. Otherwise, thanks again for being with us, and we'll see you next time.